It was a typical afternoon at the local shooting range, but what happened that day would leave everyone stunned. You've seen those moments where arrogance and ignorance meet head-on with a dose of reality, but this was something different. Something that would change the lives of two people forever. Let me take you to a moment, one that starts with a smug laugh and ends with a jaw-dropping twist. A young man, full of bravado, strolls into the range with his friends, looking for a good time. He had no idea that today would be anything but ordinary. With a few quick remarks, he casually mocks a black woman who is preparing to take her turn at the shooting line. He doesn't realize she's not just another face at the range, she's an undercover Navy SEAL. And as she listens to his taunts, something shifts in her expression. It's not anger, but calm determination. It's a feeling of control, knowing that what's about to unfold will change the course of his day and his life forever. But that's not where the story ends. No, this isn't just about one shocking confrontation. The narrative takes a sudden twist when, moments later, the same young man encounters a completely different situation, one that challenges his perceptions of kindness, generosity, and the power of a simple act. As he boards a crowded bus, a pregnant white woman struggles to find a seat. Without hesitation, the young man, whose earlier behavior showed no consideration for others, stands up and offers her his seat. The woman, with a soft smile and gratitude in her eyes, hands him a folded note. He doesn't realize it, but this small gesture is about to open a door to something life-changing. What's in that note? And how does the Navy SEAL's earlier experience tie into this unexpected encounter? As the young man's actions come full circle, we find ourselves wondering, how can a single day, filled with moments of prejudice, kindness, and shocking revelations, reshape a life forever? The tension in the air grows thicker as we move toward the conclusion of this unbelievable story. Stick with us as we uncover how everything is connected and the unexpected lessons that await. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you questioning the power of choice and the true meaning of respect and honor. As the young man stood there at the shooting range, trying to impress his friends, he felt a sense of superiority. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, the sound of shots echoing through the space. It was a typical Saturday for him, an opportunity to show off and be the center of attention. His friends had already fired off several rounds, laughing and making jokes as they took turns. And then came the woman. She walked in, calm and collected, her eyes scanning the range with a focus that seemed a little too sharp for the casual setting. Her stance was poised, confident. She wasn't here to show off, and that's what caught his attention. She seemed different.
But he didn't know why.
"Watch this," he whispered to his friends, a mischievous grin playing on his lips. He watched her set up her target, silently preparing herself. Without hesitation, he made a remark, loud enough for her to hear. "You sure you know how to handle that thing?" His friend snickered, and he felt a rush of pride as he leaned back in his chair. He was used to being the one who called the shots, literally and figuratively. But the woman didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a subtle glance, one that conveyed neither anger nor surprise, but something deeper, something unsettling. He couldn't put his finger on it. "Sure I do," she replied, her voice steady, unwavering. Something about her presence made the young man feel as if she were untouchable. It wasn't just her calm demeanor, but the way she moved, like someone who had been in situations far more intense than this. Still, he couldn't resist the temptation to keep pushing. Sure. "Guess we'll see how well you shoot then," he mocked, chuckling to himself. But the woman simply nodded, not giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. She didn't respond with any further words. Instead, she stepped up to the line and prepared to fire. There was a smoothness to her movements, a level of precision that could only come from years of training. The first shot rang out, and the target was hit dead center. The second shot and the third followed in quick succession. Each one landed perfectly on the mark. By the time she finished her round, she had hit every single target. Nothing was off. The young man's smile began to falter as he watched her take the safety off her weapon and hand it back to the range officer. His friends had gone quiet. They exchanged glances, but he could see it in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. She was no amateur. "That's impressive," he muttered, trying to regain his bravado. But the woman only gave a small, knowing smile as she walked past him, her step steady, as if nothing had happened. But in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just about the shooting anymore. It was about the realization that he had misjudged her entirely. She wasn't just someone who had proved herself in a few moments. No, there was more to her than that. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something told him he had underestimated her in a way he'd soon regret. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, the young man's day was about to take another unexpected turn. After leaving the shooting range, he headed toward the bus stop, eager to get home and shake off the encounter. He wasn't the type of guy who liked being proven wrong, and that woman had done exactly that. As he waited for the bus, he noticed a pregnant woman standing nearby. She looked exhausted, her hands resting on her swollen belly, her face pale from the heat. It was clear she was struggling to find comfort, yet there were no available seats. The bus was crowded, the air thick and stale. As the doors opened and people filed in, the young man watched as she took a few steps forward, still looking for a place to sit. Without thinking, he stood up from his seat and offered it to her. It was a small gesture, one he didn't think much of, but it was enough to make her smile softly. She looked up at him with gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft and sincere. He nodded awkwardly, not used to being thanked for something so simple. But before he could sit back down, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded note. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing against his hand briefly. "Here," she said quietly. "I hope this helps." The young man took the note without thinking, feeling a strange sense of unease. He sat back down, the bus rolling forward, but his mind wasn't on the road or the people around him. He was focused on the note in his hand, the crinkled paper now resting between his fingers. His curiosity gnawed at him, but he didn't open it right away. Instead, he stared at it, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A pregnant woman, who seemed like she was barely holding it together, had handed him a note. What did it say? Was it some kind of charity request, a pamphlet for something? But when he finally unfolded the paper and began to read, his heart skipped a beat. The note didn't contain words of gratitude or kindness, as he had expected. Instead, it was a short message, written in neat handwriting. "You don't know me, but you've just changed your life. Everything will soon make sense. The choices you make now will define your future. Stay open." The note left him with more questions than answers. What did she mean by that? How could offering a seat to a pregnant woman change his life? There was something cryptic, something ominous about her words that unsettled him. It was as if she knew something he didn't, something he wasn't ready for. He looked back up at her, but she was already gone. The bus had reached her stop, and she had stepped off, disappearing into the crowd. For a moment, he sat there in silence, staring at the note in his hands. What was he supposed to do with this? Why had she given him such a strange message? And how did it tie into the encounter at the shooting range? Was this just a coincidence, or was there something deeper at play here? His mind raced with the possibilities, but before he could make sense of it, the bus stopped, and he got off at his own stop. The weight of the note, the encounter at the range, and the strange woman's words lingered in his mind, building tension as the day wore on. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding, something he wasn't yet ready to understand. But one thing was clear, whatever it was, it had already started. As the young man walked home, his mind was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. The woman at the shooting range had been more than just a target for his mockery. She had been a lesson in humility, in strength, in something much bigger than his own ego. And now, the note from the pregnant woman, so cryptic, so strange, seemed like a sign. But a sign of what? That was the question that gnawed at him as he pushed open the door to his apartment, the noise of the city behind him fading into a dull hum. He tossed the note on his kitchen counter, still unsure whether to dismiss it as nothing more than a bizarre interaction or to take it seriously. but it kept calling him back, like a whisper he couldn't ignore. Maybe it was because of his arrogance earlier that day. Maybe it was because, deep down, he knew he wasn't the person he liked to believe he was. The truth was, he wasn't sure who he was anymore. And that scared him more than anything. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the woman from the shooting range sat in a quiet coffee shop, sipping her drink slowly as she stared out the window. Her name was Rachel, and she wasn't just any ordinary woman. Rachel was a Navy SEAL on a covert mission that no one, not even her closest colleagues, knew about. It was a mission that had brought her to this small, unremarkable town. She had been watching, observing, waiting for the right moment to act. Her task was simple in theory. Find the one person who had been causing chaos in the community, the one whose actions had been going unnoticed for far too long.
But there was more to it than that.
The person she was looking for wasn't just a criminal. They were part of a larger network, one that had far-reaching implications. The young man she'd encountered at the range, the one who had mocked her, was not the one she was after. But his arrogance, his sense of invincibility, was a perfect starting point. He wasn't just a target of hers, he was a tool in a much larger game. As Rachel sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced down at the screen. A message from her commanding officer. Get close. We need him. We know he's involved. Track him. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed a response. Understood. She didn't need to be told twice. She had known her mission would take unexpected turns, but now it was becoming personal. Back at the young man's apartment, he was pacing back and forth, trying to shake off the strange sense of unease that had settled over him. His phone buzzed, and for a moment, he thought it was a message from his friends. Maybe they were joking about what had happened at the range. But when he picked up his phone and saw the unknown number, his heart skipped a beat. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello, he said, his voice uncertain. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, a voice, calm, measured, but with an edge of something unsettling, spoke. I know who you are, and I know what you did. The young man's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Who is this? The voice on the other end didn't answer directly. I'm someone who's been watching. You've been making some poor decisions lately, and those decisions are about to come back to haunt you. You've been chosen, and there's no going back now. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. What are you talking about? His voice wavered, but he tried to keep it steady. The voice laughed softly, and it was the kind of laugh that sent a chill through him. You'll find out soon enough. Just know this. Nothing happens by chance. You think that woman at the range, the one you mocked, was just a random stranger? Think again. The choices you made today will define the rest of your life. Make sure you're ready for what comes next. And with that, the line went dead. The young man stood frozen, staring at his phone. What had just happened? The words, the tone, everything felt off, like he was being pulled into something much bigger than himself. But who was that person on the other end of the line? And how did they know about the woman at the range? His mind began to race. Could they be connected? Was this some kind of twisted game? Was Rachel's cryptic silence earlier that day not just a coincidence, but part of something far darker? Across town, Rachel was making her own preparations. She had no time to waste. The mission was slipping into more dangerous territory with every passing minute. She had to act quickly and with precision. Her eyes scanned the streets as she walked toward her car, checking the surroundings as she always did. Her instincts were sharp, and today they told her something was off. She was close now. She could feel it in her gut. The young man, he was the key. The man who had mocked her, the one who thought he was untouchable, was about to learn a lesson he wouldn't forget. But what Rachel didn't expect was how tangled her own emotions were becoming in the process. This wasn't supposed to be personal, but somehow it was. And she hated how much she was starting to care. As the young man sat in his apartment, feeling like he was being pulled into a whirlwind, he couldn't help but think about the woman who had given him the note. The woman on the bus. Was she part of this strange puzzle, or was she simply an innocent bystander? He couldn't stop thinking about the words she had written. The choices you make now will define your future. And as he stared out of his window, the city lights blinking in the distance, he knew that everything was about to change. There was no turning back now. He had stepped into a game that was far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And somewhere out there, Rachel was watching, waiting for the right moment to pull him deeper into her world. The days that followed felt like a slow descent into chaos for the young man. The strange call and the cryptic note had left him rattled, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. He found himself looking over his shoulder more than usual, every passing face becoming a potential threat, every unfamiliar sound causing his heart to race. He tried to shake it off, tried to convince himself that it was all just paranoia, but deep down, he knew something was coming. And when it arrived, it would change everything. He spent his days replaying the events of the shooting range over and over in his head. What was it about Rachel that made her different? She wasn't just another person he could mock. There was something about her calmness, the way she handled herself with such precision, that haunted him. It was as if she had seen things he couldn't begin to understand. He had no idea that Rachel had been tracking him for days, waiting for the right moment to push him further into her web. Rachel, on the other hand, was growing impatient. The mission had dragged on longer than she'd anticipated. She had infiltrated the town under the guise of a civilian, but the deeper she got, the more complicated things became. The young man, the one she had been observing, was the thread that could unravel everything. She knew he was a key player, but he was also a wild card. There were moments when he seemed entirely out of his depth, and moments when she couldn't tell if he was smarter than he let on. Every time she thought she had him figured out, he did something that threw her off. He was a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. But she couldn't afford to back out now. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. The stakes were too high. The tension was palpable in the air as Rachel prepared for the next phase of her plan. She needed to get closer to him, draw him in even more. She needed him to trust her, to believe that she wasn't the threat he thought she was. But how could she do that when everything about their relationship was built on lies? Every move she made was calculated, each word she spoke carefully chosen. And as much as she hated it, she knew she was walking a fine line. One wrong step, and it could all fall apart. The young man's unease grew with each passing day. His friends noticed the change in him, the way he kept himself more, the way he seemed on edge. They joked about it at first, asking if he was sick or just being paranoid, but it didn't help. Nothing seemed to quiet the storm that was brewing inside him. The message from the mysterious caller still echoed in his mind. "You've been chosen." Chosen for what? What did it all mean? The worst part was the feeling that he was being watched. He couldn't escape it. It was like every moment of his life had been carefully mapped out, like someone was always a step ahead of him. And when he bumped into Rachel again, a week after the shooting range incident, that feeling only intensified. It was a crowded street, the kind of afternoon where everyone's in a rush and people are too busy to notice each other. But there she was, standing at the corner, watching him. He froze when he saw her, his heart leaping into his throat. She wasn't supposed to be here.
Not now.
Not after everything. Rachel took a step forward, her eyes locking onto his. She smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "We keep running into each other," she said, her voice casual, but there was something behind it, a hidden message he couldn't decipher. I didn't expect to see you again," he stammered, trying to keep his cool, but his nerves were starting to betray him. "Funny how things work out, isn't it?" Rachel replied, her tone still light, but there was an edge to it now. "Sometimes we meet people for reasons we don't understand." He couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread as she spoke. It was as if the conversation was happening on two different levels, what she said and what she meant. And he wasn't sure which one was more dangerous. Before he could respond, Rachel turned, nodding toward a coffee shop across the street. "Why don't we grab a drink? We can talk. You look like you've got a lot on your mind." Against his better judgment, the young man followed her. Something inside him told him not to, but curiosity won out. The feeling that she was in control, the feeling that she was leading him toward something, pulled him in. What could it hurt? He was already in too deep. Inside the coffee shop, the air was thick with the hum of quiet conversations and clinking cups. They sat at a small table by the window, the light from the street lamps casting long shadows on the floor. Rachel ordered for both of them without asking, and when the drinks arrived, she took a sip without a word. The young man, still unsettled, broke the silence. "What do you want from me?" His voice was quieter than he intended, but the question had been burning in his chest for days. Rachel set her cup down, her gaze unwavering. "It's not about what I want from you. It's about what you need to understand. You've been living in a world where you think everything is just coincidence, that you can make choices without consequences." She leaned forward slightly. "But that's not how it works. Every action, every choice, ripples out in ways you can't even begin to imagine." The young man felt a wave of frustration rise in his chest. "What the hell are you talking about? Why don't you just tell me what's going on?" Rachel's expression didn't change. "I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I can tell you this. The choices you've made so far have set things in motion. And now you have a choice to make. A big one. What happens next is up to you." He could feel the weight of her words sinking in, but at the same time, they made no sense. What was she trying to say? Why couldn't she just tell him what was really going on? Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the street outside, followed by shouts. The peaceful atmosphere of the coffee shop shattered, and a sense of urgency filled the air. Rachel's eyes flicked toward the door, her expression hardening. "We need to leave. Now." The young man didn't argue. He stood up, adrenaline flooding his system. What had just happened? Why had everything escalated so quickly? Rachel grabbed his arm, guiding him out the door. But the moment they stepped into the night, they were met with chaos, sirens, shouting, and the sound of people running. Something was happening. Something big. And as the young man looked around, his heart racing, he realized he had just stepped into the storm. The chaos outside the coffee shop was growing. People were scattering, running in every direction as the distant sound of sirens grew louder. The young man's pulse quickened as Rachel tugged him through the crowd, her grip strong but not harsh, guiding him with purpose. Her calmness in the midst of all this confusion made him uneasy. She was too composed, too ready for something he couldn't yet see. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to keep it steady. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She scanned the street, her eyes darting from one person to another, as if assessing the situation with an intensity that felt almost unnatural. Her gaze then locked onto a van parked across the street. It was a nondescript vehicle, but something about it seemed off. She began to move toward it, pulling the young man along with her. "I'll explain later," she said, her voice low but urgent. "We need to get to safety." He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the growing sense of danger pushed him into a state of mind where survival seemed more important than understanding. They reached the van, and Rachel quickly opened the side door, ushering him inside. As he climbed in, he noticed the interior wasn't what he expected. It was meticulously organized, with equipment and high-tech gear neatly stowed away. It looked like something out of a spy movie, a far cry from the ordinary lives of the people he had grown up with. Rachel climbed in after him, slamming the door shut with a sense of urgency. "I need you to listen to me," Rachel said, her voice more intense now, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her usually composed demeanor. "You've been caught up in something much bigger than you think, and I'm the only one who can help you get out of it." Before he could process her words, the van's engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving the chaos behind them. As the vehicle accelerated, Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. She pressed a button on it, and the van's windows tinted automatically, blocking out the view from the outside. The atmosphere inside the van became tense, suffocating, as if they were about to enter a completely different world. "What is all this?" the young man asked, his voice rising in shock. "What's happening? Who are you?" Rachel turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You're about to find out." Just as she spoke, the van's radio crackled to life, a sharp, urgent voice coming through the speaker. "Rachel, you need to abort the mission. The situation has escalated faster than we anticipated. We have eyes on you. They know you're coming." Rachel's eyes darkened, her jaw tightening. I can't. It's too late. He's already involved. There was a pause on the other end of the line before the voice responded, its tone filled with frustration and concern. This was never supposed to involve him. We're not prepared for him to be part of this. If he's in danger. I know, Rachel cut in sharply, her fingers gripping the device with a tightness that spoke volumes. We've gone too far. But I'm not backing out now. The young man was reeling. He had no idea what any of this was. The note, the strange phone call, Rachel's cryptic words, it was all leading to something he couldn't even begin to understand. But now, with the revelation that he was somehow caught up in something bigger, something far more dangerous, it was becoming clear that he wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was in the thick of it. What's going on? He repeated, his voice edged with desperation. Rachel let out a breath, clearly weighing her words. There's an organization. A powerful group that's been manipulating events from the shadows. We've been tracking them for months. They're involved in everything. From the smallest crimes to global schemes. You've been unknowingly linked to them, and now that they know you're part of this. A loud bang interrupted her, followed by a screech of tires. The van swerved violently to the side, throwing both of them against the walls of the vehicle. The young man's heart raced as he tried to steady himself. What the hell was that? Rachel's eyes flared with intensity as she reached for the steering wheel. They've found us, she said, her voice a low growl. We need to lose them. Hold on. Before he could process what was happening, the van lurched forward, cutting through traffic with a skill that was almost too precise. Rachel maneuvered the vehicle like someone who had been in this situation countless times before. The young man couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, suffocating him with its intensity. Everything he thought he knew, his life, his choices, his future, was crumbling around him. He had never signed up for any of this, but now it was too late. As they veered into an alleyway, the van skidded to a halt. Rachel slammed her fist on the dashboard in frustration, her face pale. They've set a trap. They know we're here. We need to get out now. The young man's mind was reeling. He couldn't understand why his life had suddenly turned into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. What had he done to deserve this? He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a hero. He was just a regular guy, caught up in a nightmare he didn't know how to escape. Rachel turned to him, her expression softened for a brief moment. You need to trust me. I'm not here to hurt you. But if we don't act fast, we won't make it out of this alive. Her words struck him like a punch to the gut. He could see the fear in her eyes now, the first crack in her impenetrable facade. It was clear that Rachel, the trained operative, wasn't sure if they could make it through this. That thought alone made the young man's heart drop. If she was scared, what did that mean for him? Just as Rachel was about to speak again, the radio crackled with an even more urgent message. Rachel, they've deployed agents. You need to take him, now. It's the only way. Her hands tightened around the wheel, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Everything had led to this moment. But what did it mean?
What was she talking about?
Rachel, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady now, as though she had made a decision. She slammed her foot on the accelerator, and the van shot forward with explosive speed. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the alley, growing louder by the second. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper as she leaned over to the young man. You've got one choice left. Make it count. And just like that, everything went dark. The van slammed through the narrow alleyway at breakneck speed, the tires screeching as Rachel navigated the sharp corners with terrifying precision. The young man's heart was pounding in his chest, his mind still struggling to catch up with the chaos unfolding around him. Outside the van, he could hear the distant sound of engines revving, the unmistakable presence of pursuit closing in on them. Every second felt like an eternity. The air in the van was thick with tension. Rachel's knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel. Hold on, she muttered, her voice sharp and focused. But there was an underlying urgency that made her seem more vulnerable than he had ever seen her before. Her eyes flicked between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, calculating their next move, their next escape. But he knew it was only a matter of time before their pursuers caught up with them. As they veered out of the alley and back onto the main street, the young man caught a glimpse of the vehicles tailing them, a convoy of black SUVs, their tinted windows hiding the identities of the people inside. He could feel the heat of their pursuit, the sense that they were closing in. But Rachel wasn't slowing down. She was determined, driven by something deeper than mere survival. "Who are they?" the young man managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper, but thick with fear. Rachel didn't answer immediately, her jaw tight as she shifted gears and pushed the van even harder. "The people you've been running from," she said, her tone colder than before. "They're the ones who've been manipulating everything, the ones who set this whole mess in motion." A flash of realization hit the young man like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some random accident. "I'm being hunted." The weight of it was unbearable, and for a moment, the fear almost paralyzed him. He wasn't just caught in the middle of some dangerous game. He was a target. And worse, he had no idea why. "Why me?" he asked, his voice shaking. Rachel's eyes flicked to him, her lips forming a tight line. "You were never supposed to get involved. They wanted to keep you out of it. But they underestimated you. They didn't count on you noticing what you did. They didn't count on you seeing what they were doing." The young man's mind raced. He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he knew that everything he had done, every choice he had made, had led him to this point. This was the moment where his fate was sealed. And in that moment, he realized something. Rachel wasn't just trying to protect him. She was trying to get him out of their reach. He took a shaky breath. "What do we do now?" Rachel's gaze hardened, her focus narrowing. "We fight. We don't have a choice anymore." Just as she spoke, the sound of gunfire erupted from behind them. A bullet shattered the rearview mirror, sending shards of glass flying through the van. Rachel swerved to avoid the incoming fire, her body tensing as she pushed the van even harder. The young man instinctively ducked, his heart racing as the world outside the van became a blur of chaos and danger. The radio crackled once again, a voice full of urgency and fear. "Rachel, they're closing in. You need to get him out of there, now." Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line as she looked at the young man. "It's too late for hiding. We need to get to the extraction point, or we're both dead." He could hear the panic in her voice, but there was something else, resolve. As much as she was trying to protect him, he realized that Rachel wasn't running for herself anymore. She was running for him. The van careened down the street, narrowly avoiding the SUVs that were gaining on them. He couldn't help but think that this was it, that there was no way they were going to make it out alive. But then, something happened. Rachel's hand shot out toward the glove compartment, and she pulled out a small, black device. Without hesitation, she pressed a button. A loud, blinding explosion ripped through the air as the van's back door suddenly erupted in a burst of flame. The shockwave rattled the van, but Rachel didn't flinch. She floored the gas pedal, propelling them forward. The young man turned to look behind them, his eyes wide with disbelief. The explosion had taken out 2 of the black SUVs, sending them careening off the road, but there were still more following. "Where are we going?" he asked, gripping the seat as the van swerved to avoid another bullet. "To the extraction point," Rachel replied, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet intensity. "It's the only place they won't find us." But as they reached a series of twisting, narrow roads on the outskirts of town, something unexpected happened. A figure stepped out from the shadows ahead of them, blocking their path. The van screeched to a halt, and for a moment, everything went still. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her lips pulling back into a tight, almost grim smile. The young man's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" The figure ahead of them stepped into the van's headlights, revealing a face that made his blood run cold. It was her, the pregnant woman from the bus. She stood there, unmoving, her arms crossed, her eyes locked onto Rachel's. But it wasn't just her presence that was unsettling, it was the weapon in her hand. A sleek, silenced pistol, held casually at her side, aimed directly at them. The young man blinked in disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" Rachel's eyes shifted between the woman and the young man, and for the first time, he saw something that had been hidden in her expression the entire time.
Fear.
Rachel spoke in a low, controlled voice. This wasn't supposed to happen. The pregnant woman didn't flinch, but she smiled softly, almost knowingly. I'm sorry, Rachel, but you've made the wrong choice. Before Rachel could react, the woman raised her weapon and fired. The shot rang out, and the world seemed to stop. But instead of hitting Rachel, the bullet flew past them and shattered the rear window of the van. The young man barely had time to register what was happening before he saw Rachel's hand dart out, pressing a hidden button beneath the dash. The van's back door flew open, and a small jet of smoke erupted from it. Get out, Rachel shouted.
Now.
With the noise of the gunfire still ringing in his ears, the young man jumped out of the van, his legs shaking. He barely heard Rachel's voice behind him, urging him to keep running. But as he sprinted away, he could see the truth of the situation. Rachel hadn't been trying to save him all this time. She had been protecting herself. And as the van exploded behind him in a massive fireball, he realized that the woman on the bus, the one who had handed him the life-changing note, had been the real mastermind behind everything. The young man stumbled, his heart racing as he sprinted away from the wreckage of the van. The deafening roar of the explosion echoed behind him, but it was drowned out by the chaotic pounding in his chest. He couldn't focus. He couldn't think. He could only run, propelled by a mix of fear and confusion. His legs burned, his breath ragged, but he couldn't stop. He had no idea where he was going, no idea what came next. All he knew was that everything had changed, and nothing could ever be the same. As he rounded a corner, he heard footsteps behind him, fast and heavy, but it wasn't Rachel. He dared to glance back and saw the pregnant woman, still walking with that unsettling calmness, the same silenced pistol now held at her side like an accessory. There was no anger in her demeanor, no rush, just a quiet certainty. It was like she had been expecting all of this to happen. He kept running, his mind reeling.
Who was she?
Why was she involved? What the hell was going on? It felt like the world had been turned upside down, and he was still standing on the edge, trying to make sense of it all. The explosion, the pursuit, the dangerous secrets, none of it made sense. The closer he got to the edge of town, the more confused he became. His life, up until now, had been simple.
School. Friends.
His dreams. But now, everything was tangled in a web of lies, deceit, and danger. And then, as if the universe was giving him a brief respite from the chaos, a car screeched to a halt in front of him. The door flew open, and he didn't even hesitate. He dove into the car, slamming the door shut behind him. The driver, a man in his 30s with a grim expression, didn't even acknowledge him. He just floored the accelerator, speeding off with a force that sent the young man back into his seat. "Who are you?" the young man asked, finally finding his voice. His hands were shaking, his mind still struggling to catch up. The driver's eyes flicked to him, his face impassive. "We don't have much time. We need to get to the safe house. They'll be looking for you." The young man opened his mouth to protest, to ask more questions, but he was interrupted by a sudden, harsh static from the radio. The driver cursed under his breath and quickly switched the frequency. A voice came through, distorted but unmistakable. "We've got him. Move in. Don't let him slip away." The words hit the young man like a blow to the gut. "They're coming for me," he muttered, his voice trembling.
Why?
"What do they want with me?" The driver's eyes narrowed as he navigated through the winding streets. "You're not just some bystander. You're part of something much bigger. And right now, the people behind all of this are the most dangerous force you'll ever encounter." The car sped through the night, the city fading into the distance as they headed into the wilderness. The young man couldn't wrap his head around what the driver was saying. Part of something bigger? He had no idea what that meant, but it sounded like something out of a movie, something too surreal to be real. And yet, here he was, his life turned upside down in a way that no one could have prepared him for. "We've been keeping an eye on you," the driver continued, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Ever since you picked up that note. Ever since you started asking the right questions, they knew you were a threat. But You were never supposed to get involved. The young man's mind was spinning, but one thing was clear now. The note. The one the woman gave me. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. He glanced at the driver, a desperate question in his eyes. What's the note for? What did it mean? The driver's grip tightened on the wheel, his face darkening. It's a key. A key to understanding everything, the organization, the manipulation, the corruption. The people who control everything have been in power for years. And you've been targeted because you're the one who can expose them. The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. He couldn't even process it. Expose them? The young man had never asked for any of this. He was just trying to live his life, go to school, dream of a future. But now, his future seemed uncertain, wrapped up in a dangerous game he didn't know how to play. As the car sped toward the safe house, he thought back to Rachel. Her coldness when she revealed the truth. Her fear. Was she part of this, too? Had she been protecting him all along, or was she just another player in this vast, shadowy game? The questions gnawed at him, but he had no answers. The car finally slowed as they reached a secluded building, tucked away from the rest of the world. The driver glanced at him, his expression softening just a fraction. "You're safe here, for now," he said, turning off the engine. "But this isn't over. You have a choice to make." The young man stared at the building, the weight of everything crashing down on him. A choice. What choice could there possibly be? He had no idea how to fight back against people who seemed to control everything, who had been watching him without him even knowing it. "Do I have a choice?" he asked, his voice thick with uncertainty. "What's left for me to do?" The driver's eyes softened, but there was no illusion of hope in them. "You can walk away. Go back to your life. Try to forget everything. But they'll find you. They'll keep coming for you." The young man swallowed hard, the tension in his chest tightening with every word. "They'll keep coming for me." It was the truth he couldn't deny. No matter what he did, no matter where he ran, he would never be safe until he faced the truth. "You can also fight back," the driver continued. "But it won't be easy. You'll have to face the people who control everything. The ones who've been pulling the strings for years." The young man's mind raced. He had never asked for any of this, but now, it felt like the only path left was forward. He had seen too much, learned too much, and understood far too little to turn back. He had to face it, whatever it was. With a final, deep breath, he nodded. "I'll fight." The driver gave him a small, approving nod, but there was no time for celebration. The door opened, and the young man stepped out into the cold night. The door to the safe house creaked open, revealing a world that had once seemed distant. Something out of reach. Now it was his reality. The life he had once known was gone. The dangerous journey ahead would demand everything from him. But as he stepped forward, he felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting for truth, fighting to expose the ones who had been manipulating the world for so long. And he was ready.